Two McLarens. Both inside the top 6 on the grid in China. Both ready to fight for a podium in only the second race of the 2026 Formula 1 season. And then, something unbelievable happened. Neither car even started the race. No formation lap. No lights out. No Grand Prix. Just two silent cars, one stuck in the garage and one stranded on the grid, while the entire field drove away. And the detail that instantly shocked the paddock was this. Both failures were linked to the electrical side of the Mercedes power unit. The same engine package used by multiple teams across the grid. Which means this might not be just a McLaren disaster. It could be the first warning sign of something much bigger. Because if the electrical architecture of the Mercedes power unit has a hidden weakness, every customer team could suddenly be at risk. And that is exactly why the FIA has started paying very close attention. 2 races into a brand new regulation era. Billions invested in completely new hybrid technology. And suddenly one of the most dominant engine programs in Formula 1 may be facing its first serious reliability crisis. So the real question is no longer what happened to McLaren. The real question is this. Did the Chinese Grand Prix just expose the first crack in the Mercedes power unit project for the new 2026 era? The Chinese Grand Prix was supposed to confirm something very important. That McLaren was ready to fight at the front in 2026. The season had only just begun. Australia opened the championship with huge expectations around the team. Lando Norris arrived as the defending world champion. Oscar Piastri was expected to take another big step forward. And the early signs looked promising. The MCL 40 appeared balanced, competitive, fast enough to challenge near the front of the grid. Shanghai was the perfect circuit to test that belief. Long straights, heavy braking zones, a track that exposes both aerodynamic efficiency and power unit performance. If a car is quick in China, it usually means the entire package is strong. And on Saturday, McLaren looked exactly like that. Qualifying went smoothly. Lando Norris delivered a precise, confident lap. Oscar Piastri followed just behind him. Both cars secured positions on the 3rd row of the grid, 5th and 6th. In Formula 1 terms, that is prime attacking territory. Close enough to pressure the leaders. Close enough to capitalize on strategy. Close enough to fight for the podium. Inside the McLaren garage on Sunday morning, the mood was calm. Focused. Engineers went through the final pre-race procedures. Energy deployment maps were checked. Battery levels verified. Telemetry from overnight simulations matched expectations. Everything looked perfectly normal. The team believed they were ready for a strong race. But then, about 1 hour before the start, something unusual appeared on the data screens. A small electronic irregularity on Norris's car. At first, it did not look dramatic. Warnings like this can occasionally appear during system initialization. Still, in modern Formula 1, no team ignores electrical warnings. The systems are simply too complex. So McLaren reacted immediately. Mechanics began removing the floor of the car. Panels around the rear of the chassis were opened. Engineers focused on the area surrounding the power unit. Because in the 2026 cars, the electrical architecture is incredibly sophisticated. Battery management, energy recovery, energy deployment. Hundreds of sensors communicating at every moment. If even one signal becomes unstable, it can trigger protection systems. And when that happens, the car may refuse to run. Inside the garage, laptops were connected. Diagnostics began running. Engineers analyzed every signal coming from the hybrid system. For several minutes, the team worked quickly but carefully. And eventually, it seemed like the issue had been solved. Telemetry returned to normal. Electrical systems looked stable again. The car appeared ready. But Formula 1 problems rarely reveal their full story immediately. Because the real test was still coming. The final power unit fire-up procedure. The moment the entire hybrid system must activate. Combustion engine. Electric motor. Battery deployment. All synchronized perfectly. And when the team initiated that sequence, the system failed. The engine did not start. Not because of fuel pressure. Not because of the combustion engine. But because the electrical side of the power unit suddenly stopped responding. Despite several attempts to reset the electronics, the system remained completely silent. And suddenly the atmosphere inside the McLaren garage changed. Concern turned into urgency. Because the clock was now against them. Other teams were already preparing their cars. Drivers were climbing into the cockpit. Engines were firing up across the pit lane. And Norris's car was still completely lifeless. The reigning world champion was about to miss the race entirely. But what nobody in the paddock realized at that moment was that this was only the beginning of the problem. Because while McLaren engineers were desperately trying to revive Norris's car inside the garage, Oscar Piastri's car was already sitting on the starting grid. And for a few minutes, everything looked perfectly normal. For a few moments, everything on the grid looked completely normal. Oscar Piastri was sitting in the car. Mechanics surrounded the grid positions. Fans in the grandstands were waiting for the engines to fire. The usual tension before the start of a Formula One race. Engines warming up. Engineers stepping away. Drivers preparing mentally for the formation lap. Nothing seemed out of place. But then the restart procedure began. Every car on the grid must go through it. The moment the hybrid system powers up again before the formation lap. And suddenly, the McLaren did not respond. No ignition. No sound from the engine. No activation from the hybrid system. For a second, it looked like a minor glitch. Something that could be reset quickly. Engineers signaled to the mechanics. They attempted a system reboot. But the car remained completely silent. Another electrical failure. Another shutdown of the system. And just like Norris's car earlier in the garage, the problem appeared to be linked to the power unit. Within seconds, the situation became clear. This was not a simple malfunction. This was something much more serious. Because now both McLaren cars were affected. Two failures. Two different moments. But both connected to the same critical subsystem. The electrical side of the Mercedes power unit. Inside the McLaren pit wall, engineers began working frantically. Emergency reset procedures were attempted. Electronic systems were rebooted again and again. Mechanics rushed from the garage toward the grid. But nothing worked. The system refused to come back online. And that was the moment the disaster became official. Both McLaren drivers were out of the race. Before the race had even started. The cars had to be pushed away from the grid and back into the pit lane. Inside the garage, the atmosphere shifted from urgency to disbelief. Because what had just happened was almost unheard of in modern Formula One. For the first time in McLaren's history, both cars failed to start a Grand Prix due to reliability issues. And immediately, engineers across the paddock began asking the same question. What do both cars have in common? Because simultaneous failures almost always point to a shared component. Something fundamental inside the car. And in this case, the answer was obvious. The power unit. More specifically, the electrical architecture of the Mercedes hybrid system. Under the 2026 regulations, that part of the engine is more important than ever. Electrical energy now plays a much larger role in performance. Energy recovery systems generate massive power under braking. Energy deployment delivers critical acceleration on the straights. And all of it must remain perfectly synchronized with the combustion engine. If that synchronization fails, the system shuts down completely. Which means the car cannot run. In some cases, it cannot even start. Exactly the situation McLaren experienced in China. But once that detail became clear, the entire paddock began looking at the incident from a very different angle. Because McLaren does not build its own power unit. They depend on Mercedes high-performance powertrains. The same engine supplier used by several other teams across the grid. And that raised a much bigger question. If the failure is connected to the Mercedes power unit itself, could other teams be facing the same risk? Once the race in Shanghai was over, the focus inside the paddock shifted immediately. Not to the winner. Not to the podium celebrations. But to the McLaren garage. Because what had just happened was too unusual to ignore. Two cars. Two separate failures. Both connected to the same subsystem. And in Formula One, when that happens, the investigation begins instantly. McLaren engineers started analyzing the data the moment the cars returned to the garage. Every sensor. Every electrical signal. Every line of telemetry recorded in the minutes before the failures. At the same time, Mercedes high-performance powertrains joined the investigation. The department responsible for building the power unit. Both teams began working together to identify the exact cause of the shutdowns. And the first question they needed to answer was simple. Was this a McLaren problem? Or was it a Mercedes problem? Because the integration between a Formula One chassis and its power unit is extremely complex. Cooling systems. Electrical wiring. Energy management software. Hundreds of parameters must work together perfectly. If even one configuration is wrong, the system can trigger safety shutdowns. But McLaren quickly made something very clear. Nothing had changed between qualifying on Saturday and the race start on Sunday. The same hardware. The same specifications. The same configuration that worked perfectly during qualifying. That detail immediately raised concern among engineers. Because when a system fails without any change in configuration, it usually points to something deeper. A component failure. A reliability weakness. or a flaw that only appears under very specific conditions. And that possibility becomes even more serious under the new 2026 regulations, because the electrical side of the power unit is now more important than ever before. In previous Formula One eras, the combustion engine still delivered the majority of the power. The hybrid system supported it. Now the balance has changed. Electrical energy contributes a massive portion of the total performance. Energy recovery systems harvest enormous power under braking. The battery stores and deploys that energy across the lap. And the synchronization between those systems must be perfect. If the electrical architecture loses synchronization, the system shuts down instantly. Which is exactly what appears to have happened in China. But the situation becomes even more interesting when looking at the rest of the grid. Because McLaren was not the only team experiencing unusual problems that weekend. Other Mercedes-powered cars also struggled. The Williams driven by Alex Albon failed to start the race. The Audi driven by Gabriel Bortolito also encountered technical problems preventing the car from taking the start. Different teams, different cars, but all using the same Mercedes power unit. Now, this does not automatically mean the failures share the same cause. Formula One technology is incredibly complex. But patterns like this always attract attention. Especially from the FIA. The governing body constantly monitors technical issues that affect multiple teams. Not because they suspect rule violations, but because reliability problems across several cars can influence the fairness of the championship. And when several teams using the same engine experience problems during the same weekend, questions begin to appear. For now, Mercedes insists the incidents are isolated. Unusual coincidences. Problems that are already being investigated. And publicly, McLaren has avoided blaming its engine supplier. Team principal Andrea Stella has been extremely careful with his words. He described the situation as highly unusual and confirmed that both teams are working together to understand what happened. But Stella also hinted at something interesting. McLaren needs deeper understanding of the power unit systems under the new regulations. More information, more tools, more transparency about how to operate the engine at its limits. Because losing an entire race weekend without even starting the Grand Prix is more than just frustrating. It can change the direction of a championship. Lando Norris is defending his world title. McLaren hopes to fight near the top of the constructors' standings. And China delivered the worst possible result. 0 points. 0 race data. 0 opportunity to learn from a full race distance. Which leaves one final question hanging over the paddock as the season moves forward. Was the Chinese Grand Prix simply an extremely rare coincidence? Or did we just witness the first warning sign that the Mercedes power unit for the 2026 era might have a hidden weakness waiting to be exposed?